Hi, and welcome to the Nuclear Snell channel. In this episode, I will show you how I made my M4 airsoft rifle look like a futuristic Gauss rifle. First of all, let's see some finished prop photos. Alright, so this is a purely optical modification. Inside it is still the same airsoft rifle it was. I didn't fuck with its performance because I don't care. If you care, it was a Combat Machine 16 Raider from G&G. But the cool thing about this modification is that you can fit it onto any quad rail. Or in fact, you don't even need the bottom and the top rails, you just need the left and right Picatinny rails to fit this modification on your gun. Theoretically, if you're in the States, you can probably fit this modification onto your real gun. Beware of one thing though, it does make it look cooler, but it does not make it handle better. In fact, my point of balance on this gun is somewhere around here, which is pretty uncomfortable. Usually it should be somewhere around here. Which is why I plan to add some lead weights into these fake battery boxes here, so that my point of balance shifts further backwards, making the gun overall heavier but easier to handle, because it's such a bitch to handle right now. The Combat Machine 16 is not the best gun for this build. It gave me problems down the line bringing this quad rail back onto the gun with the rails attached to them, but I used this gun just because it was the gun I had, and it worked out just fine. But just saying, maybe there is a gun better suited for this out there, M4 or otherwise. So first of all, this had to go, because logically it would just interfere with the rails physically. So I just lopped it off. And now let's get to how I made those rails, which are the base of this gun, or of this gun modification. I made them from aluminum profiles, so I took two profiles like this on either side, so it's one side, other side, and here is the center. So this one is a 2.3 centimeters across. It fits perfectly onto a wrist rail. And here is how I connected those pieces. This is how it looks laid out, not connected yet. This is how it will look once I connect it. And I want to fasten them later to this quad rail using those two holes. So I need to measure the distance, I need to mark the holes, which I'm doing here. Then I find the middle, and I use a punch. Punch is very useful for drilling holes that are more precise. And as you can see here, it fits just fine. Now let's flip the rail. This is how it will fit onto the quad rail later on. Here it is again, laid out, not connected yet with those holes. And what I want to do now is drill a hole here, which will allow me to connect the middle rail to this rail, and of course I will repeat the same on this side. The problem is I cannot access a screw with my screwdriver right here unless I also drill a hole through this wall right here, so basically going from here. For this I flip the rail, so now basically this side you're seeing right now, it is inside of here, and I drill a hole there on both sides, on both rails. So this is that big hole. Through this hole will a screw head can fit through this hole, and this is a 3mm hole. The screw will fit through this, but not the screw head. And here is our main rail, which goes onto the quad rail later. You can see the screw right here, going through that hole like this, and here's the 3mm hole, and this will connect to this like this. So we have a hole in this wall right here through which I can put my screwdriver through, just like this. That hole was necessary just for this purpose. And now I'm just fastening the screw and the nut. And here it is. I have also already fastened it on the other side. You can see it here kind of blurry in the background. And I of course repeat this procedure for the other side until we have a rail like this. In retrospect, I could have probably just found a rail which, you know, already looks more like what I was looking for without having to compose it out of 3 rails. And or I could have just used epoxy instead of screwing around, literally and figuratively. But it worked out just fine, and I didn't want to spend hours looking for just the perfect rail, blah blah blah. And I didn't trust epoxy just as much to be that sturdy as a pair of screws. But I think I was wrong on that. I'll get to that in a second. Epoxy is actually very sturdy. So never mind this, I will get to what this is soon enough. Here I'm just roughly laying out how I want to arrange my coil pairs and my coils onto this rail. And what you see here, this is a stair edging Treppenabsatz in German. Got this from the Hornbach construction store. And you see here I have marked it in such a way as I would like to have it on my rail. And then I use my scroll saw, you can also use Dremel or whatever else, to cut it off like this. And you can see here that I have also rounded the edges to avoid scratching myself or someone else up, and also to give it a nice look even if you zoom in. Yeah, same goes here. This is kind of rough. I think this is before the sanding. Alright, and here is a rough mock-up of how it will look. As you can recognize by this zip tie, it is not yet properly connected. You can also see here that I have marked the rail like this. It just indicates that I want to later lop it off under an angle so that it doesn't give an ugly 90-degree angle here. So I'm gonna do this now, and what you see here is this stair edging rail. I'm taking its exact angle and transferring it onto my main rail. So underneath it's the main rail, and this is the stair edging. I'm doing this because compositionally it will look better if the exact angle echoes a couple of times through the artwork. It's just applied design theory. I won't get to into detail on that right now. And here is how it looks when I lopped it off. You see I ignored this marking because it was just way too far to the front. And here is what I actually have cut off, and also, as you can recognize by this nice rounded edge, I've also sanded it like I did before. Especially in this part I'm going to be gripping the gun, so I didn't want to cut myself on some rough metal. And here is the next step, which is attaching this stair edging piece to the main rail. And I did not find the possibility to use screws there, because I love screwing. And I found myself forced to use epoxy, and I was very skeptic about it at first, because it has just 3 contact points, or more like contact lines, like this point times the length of both rails, this and this, so just touching in 3 places. And I was skeptic about it first, but trust me, epoxy held like hell. You can see it here drying out, and I'm using the epoxy, which takes a couple of minutes to harden and then like 2 hours to fully harden. It's much better than those epoxies where you have to wait forever. And I did some stress tests on this, basically bending it, trying to break it, because I really want to know if what I've built is sturdy or not, because I don't want it breaking on a movie set or LARP or a photo shoot or wherever I may go. So what I ended up doing is bending the whole thing a bit instead of breaking it apart where it is held together by epoxy. Epoxy holds like hell if you use it properly. I have a video about using epoxy. It's called Shredder Tool, Tools of the Apocalypse, the Shredder Tool or something like that. You can find it in my video description, in my video list. And there I explain how to use epoxy properly. So if you do this, it holds like hell. I of course also sand this using my miniature belt sander. It's a very handy tool, by the way. It's a Proxxon BSE, and it is basically a small belt sander. The advantage of it, you can do much more detailed work with it, and also if you make a mistake, it doesn't eat you alive. It doesn't chew your hand off. Okay, so I repeat that procedure with attaching that stair edging thing to both sides of each rail, and I repeat the whole thing until I have 2 rails. And then I use some black spray paint and sandpaper to achieve this painted and then distressed effect to make it look aged and dirty. Now let's put something onto those rails, shall we? And what goes onto those rails are the coils, which are packed in those coil pairs. Here are the finished coil pairs, and now let's get to how I made them. So right here in the middle you can see that each coil has a large metal round piece facing topwards, and those are simply pieces made out of sheet aluminum. It's a 3mm sheet of aluminum. 2mm would have been enough. I don't recommend 1, that's too flimsy. And what I'm using here is a hole saw, Kronbohrer in German. Unfortunately, it has this fixed central drill, which ended up creating larger holes in the center of those circular elements than my screws with which I fasten it later on are, which created some wobble, but which I was able to eliminate using some double-sided adhesive tape. It is optimal if this drill has the exact same diameter as the screws you use later on to fasten this, but me being a sturdiness Nazi and not having troubles with it later on shows that you can work with holes that don't fit 100% as well. So the way it comes out of the hole saw is obviously with burrs, and I remove those with my belt sander. Standard procedure, just always get rid of burrs. Burrs are your worst enemy. So then it looks like this. Doesn't have to be perfect. You see there are some scratches and stuff, but it's supposed to be a dystopian prop, so it even adds to the feeling. I make 8 of these because that's the amount of coils that I have. Next, plumbing rings, Dichtungsringe in German. These are from the Hornbach construction store, and this one is 5 cm and this one is 6 cm. You find them in the plumbing compartment of your construction store or your Home Depot. If you're in America and want to make a build like this, I would recommend you first find the appropriate sized rings or whatever is the closest to what you want to have. I don't know, maybe you want to have huge coils, that would also look cool. And then you cut out the proper size of those metal rings. Because, you know, you can cut any size of those rings, but you don't find any size of these plumbing rings. These are used to connect like toilet pipes to each other, or I don't know what really. And the cool thing about this, like this 6 cm plumbing ring, the 6 cm describes this inner diameter into which the 6 cm aluminum ring, which I just cut out, fits perfectly, like this. And here you can see me also having cut out a rough plastic ring of the same size. This will face towards the rail, towards the gun. You will not see this, but this is needed for stability. So first of all, I pop in this plastic ring into that plumbing ring. And then I'm also dropping this smaller 5 cm plumbing ring inside of here, so it will basically fit right inside of this groove, and this ring also gives stability to the whole build. It prevents it from wobbling around too much. Then I drop the second large 6 cm plumbing ring on top of that, so it goes right on top of this, and the bottom edge of this will touch the top edge of this just fine. And then I drop the metal ring on top of that. It goes right into that groove, creating an element like this. So now I flipped it over, facing with the plastic side skywards, upwards. And you can see here that I've applied some double-sided adhesive tape to prevent the whole thing from shifting. The thing about double-sided adhesive tape is that all by itself it is not very good for holding things together, at least not permanently. But once you have it there and apply pressure, it will not shift around a millimeter. It will hold in place like hell. Alright, next part. This is a drywall connector. In German, Trockenbauverbinde, again the Hornbach construction store. You will find them in the drywall section. Those look sci-fi as hell. And what you see me holding here are two of those coil elements with the metal and plastic discs inside of them, sandwiched between two of those drywall connectors held together by some 5mm screws. To avoid the hole being too large problem, I could have actually just taken larger screws, but I couldn't be bothered because, again, with the double-sided adhesive tape and enough pressure, it doesn't shift around, and I don't intend to break walls with my rifle. That drywall connector can be bent into shapes like this, which is pretty cool. And this bent shape will be later applied on top of that sandwich. So here is a bottom drywall connector, top drywall connector, and top cross bent drywall connector to create that sci-fi-ish look. Here you can see a 5mm screw with a washer going through the drywall connector, and on top of that I just put my metal coils. So this is the metal side, this is facing outwards, this will be the visible side. Just press it together, and on top of that, now this is the side that is facing towards the gun. On top of that I put this second drywall connector and then attach the whole thing using a nut. But I do not just attach it like this. Wait a second. So the problem here is, if this side will be facing our rails, which we have made before, it will not work out because of these elements being not flat. It doesn't create a flat surface. It will wobble around, it will just not connect because our rails are basically flat. So we need to correct the problem, and the best way to correct a problem is with a hammer. Enough said. So now we have a flat surface with those screws sticking through, and on top of this we can now put our rail and then connect this to the rail, but not just yet. And to connect those parts I just bent over these small metal pieces. You can also use epoxy. I used a lot of epoxy on this build. Again, holds like hell. But here I'm just bending over those small metal pieces. It was the easiest way. Now, I had those parts. These basically go on top of that whole element to add some additional detail. And I don't know what these are. I just found them in my junk crate, in one of my junk crates. You can easily cut out those with a scroll saw or a circular saw or whatever. And you can see that it consists out of two pieces, this piece, and here I just also connected them again, you guessed it, epoxy. If you're smart and have access to some companies online that can cut out pieces like this for you, you can also have them cut out the metal circles and this and anything else. Of course, it doesn't only take being smart, it also takes a bit of money, but it also saves you a lot of time. So if you can hire a service which will cost efficiently cut out pieces for you, if you know exactly what your pieces are supposed to be and can provide a vector file, you might save a lot of time. So yeah, here it is again, how it will look. And I want to have some stencils here as final detail. So I have used my cutting plotter to cut out some stencils from a adhesive vinyl foil, those number stencils right here. And I want to number those coils, so this is coil pair 1, coil A and coil B, and this is the second one, and so on and so forth. Here you can see me having taped off everything that should not get any paint, and then I just spray it with some paint. And here is the finished stencil on those parts. You also can see I've dirtied them up. Here is a better photo, so here is some basic grunge and dirt effect. And here is the stencil. The cutting plotter which I'm using is a silhouette portrait. It costs like 150 euros, and if you do even as much as being a vigorous hobbyist about all this crafting stuff and do a lot of stencils, it will save you so much time. Doing this professionally, I wish I had bought this small, inexpensive, time-saving, super precise device much earlier. I mean, just look at that. It looks industrial. I could have not ever cut that out by hand. Alright, so here is a small problem. One of our coil pairs will be covering one of those main connecting holes which will connect those big aluminum rails to the RIS quad rail of the gun. So we will have to have one of our main connecting screws go through this bottom drywall part. And for this I just slip it through until it is inside of here. So here's the top and here's the bottom. Here will be the aluminum rail. Here will be the hole in the aluminum rail which connects to the RIS rail, whose hole will be here. So yeah, this is a main connecting screw in addition to those small screws which just connect that coil pair to the aluminum rails, but not to the gun. And here is also a hole on top in this drywall connector because of the way it is shaped. And through this I can fit an Allen wrench which goes to that screw and allows me to use it. There is an easier way of fitting it all together. Here is a flipped coil pair. You can recognize it by those plastic parts facing upwards. And I just, hold it like this and lower the drywall connector bottom part, which is facing the rail, onto the assembly. Now I'm using one of those to mark the position. So here is that main hole I was just talking about. So this connects right to the gun, while this will not. I'm marking these holes right here, and I'm drilling then those holes then on into this rail. And you can see that those holes connect to those screws. I'm lowering the rail like this, so this top part of the rail will face the gun. Here's our main screw, and I lower this down and I apply the nuts. So you can see those screws are just long enough to hold that coil assembly onto the main rail, but this will not touch the RIS rail, which will be here. And this screw, it is just not pushed all the way through yet. It will go nice and high, or when we flip this, nice and low, right into the hole of my RIS rail. So now that I have attached those coil pairs to my aluminum rails, I'm looking to create some interestingly looking cabling. So I've decided to take some thick cables and a thinner cable in a contrasting signal color, such as yellow, because it looks kind of sci-fi-ish. And in order to achieve this effect, which looks like you can see it here, like that cabling is continuous, like it goes through the entire assembly. You can see it here between the coils. I'm just putting a small piece of cable here, and here you can also see a small piece of black cable lying in there. This I could have just put, the whole cable just along this entire cable channel, but I didn't have that much cable, so I had to cheat like this. But you cannot tell the difference afterwards. It's just, squeezed there between those coil pairs and the cable channel. It's really tight. It will never shift. This is one of my favorite photos from this making of. It looks like some really cool sci-fi stuff ready to be assembled, which it is. So this is something, like right now it doesn't even look like it necessarily goes into the gun. It could be going onto my arms or something like this, so I can shoot laser from my arms. Alright, enough rambling. Here is the quad rail, which I have detached from the gun. And here is the bottom side of the gun, of the rail, which will face the quad rail. I'm adding some washers here so that they will create a nice large contact surface so that there is no wobbling in this whole assembly. So this rail will not shift around versus the RIS rail. A step that is very important is to apply Loctite, which is a compound that is designed specifically to prevent screws from unscrewing when you screw around with them. You can still untighten them if you really want to, but they will very unlikely untighten all by themselves, which is something you don't want. So Loctite locks your screws tight. And here I'm lowering my wrist rail, my quad rail, onto the aluminum rail. And here is a problem. The nut, which is supposed to hold it all in place, doesn't fit into this groove right here. You see, it is just too fat for this. So I'm grinding off the nut on two sides until it fits. Until it looks like this. You can see that this side and this side have been flattened. And the cool thing about this, now I don't even have to hold it anymore because it's held there just by this wrist rail itself. It will not rotate, just as a small bonus. This is a piece of MDF board. You can basically use anything that is hard. Its purpose is the same one as the washers from before. It just creates a large contact surface which prevents the whole assembly from wobbling. I hate wobbling. Alright, and here you can see that the nut is tightened, so is the other one, so the rail is attached to the quad rail. And I repeat the procedure on both sides. And what I'm showing here is that I'm capable of accessing this screw right here, the black one behind the rail, which is required to reassemble the gun to put the quad rail back into place, blah blah blah. I'm capable of doing so by just bending it a bit. This construction is a bit flexible, which allows me to put an Allen wrench through this. Unfortunately, this particular model of M4 airsoft gun requires to actually fiddle around in the front. Usually you don't have to. Usually you just, attach it here and you don't have to fuck with the front, but here you have. Yeah, this looks like some sort of, you could leave this as it is and sell it for $20 million and write something like blah blah, the artist criticizes the technology and weapons, blah 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 blah. Looks like modern art. Alright, yeah, whatever I'm showing here. Next thing we're gonna do is this small controlling chip on the side of the rifle. So it was supposed to be a chip which connects to the rail with this flat cable. So this flat gray cable will go right into that hole, creating an effect like, it's a controlling microprocessor, because, it's all a complicated rifle that needs a firing sequence for those coils, blah blah blah. It's a V85 processor. What it actually is, it's just, pieces of scrap electronics which I found in my electronics junk box, with a sticker on top of it, and this cable thing, it's not even a cable, it's just a piece of some rubber band or whatever it is. I'm using some double-sided adhesive tape here. Same on the other side to prevent it from shifting out. Not that it ever would, because those heavy cables will be pressing it hard against the gun, and it is in a position which will not get anywhere. There will not be any stress on that assembly. Otherwise I would have a problem, because there was no beautiful way of attaching this whole thing to the gun without disassembling the whole gun and drilling holes from the inside and all that tedious stuff. So here I'm just using some double-sided adhesive tape and some instant glue, and it worked out just fine. Doesn't shift a millimeter. But again, just because this part is not getting any stress. If you're working on parts that do get stress, then use something more solid. Okay, time to get to the butt of the gun. What you see me using here is, in German, Stromverteilerkästen from Hellweg Baumarkt construction store. Those are electricity redirection boxes, or I don't know what it's called in English. Basically, those are designed to, redirect your electricity cables for your home or workshop or whatever you are supplying with electricity. And those are specifically designed to accept cables going into them. So this is exactly how I will connect those cables going from the rail to those boxes. I have spray painted the boxes and applied some dirt and grunge effect. I will not go into detail on that because I have a whole video about applying grunge and dirt effects. And here's how I connect those boxes to each other. Basically just a small screw with washers on each side, and in between here I think it's called a thumb screw, in German Rändelmutter. It is basically a screw, a nut, not a screw, which you can unscrew by hand, hence those riflings. So it looks like this. It looks like, you know, there's power being transferred between those boxes through a thick metallic cable or whatever it is. Well, it's not. But I wanted that effect. So yeah, here is how it looks with all three boxes being connected. I am not bothered by those screws here because, you know, no one will be grabbing inside of my battery boxes on any event ever, because they will have lids on top of them. And here is the whole thing again on the rifle. Here's how my cables will go in there. Now what we're looking at is the bottom part of it. So this plastic plate, which I have cut out from an old cutting board for food, which you can notice here, this will be facing the butt. The problem being that I wanted to connect, I wanted to have a way to securely connect that these rubberized bands here to the boxes, and also, as you can see, the geometry of the bottom of those boxes doesn't exactly allow for good contact to flat surfaces. Well, this board is much better at the job. So I'm just sandwiching those rubberized bands between the boxes and the board. Here is how it looks when it's laid out. And I've drilled some holes here and here. I'm not connecting it to the central box. No need. And I'm using a larger drill at the end in order to fit those screw heads lower. I'm basically countersinking them. Ideally would be to have a countersunk screw here, but this small overhead doesn't bother me that much because the overall thing is flat enough to contact the flat surface of the gun butt or the gun stock. So here's how the hole looks, into which the screw is countersunk. Now, yeah, you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just lowering it on top of that. And here is one of the screws already finished. Here's the other one. I'm nipping that one off because this one would interfere with my cables, which will go from this side. Now if I flip it over, now the cables go from this side. And here's how the whole thing looks. This is how it looks from the bottom. Screw 1, screw 2, and those rubberized bands are dead in place. They will never shift away. Now I'm putting those cables in there using some interestingly looking whatever the things are. I don't even know what it's called in German. Found it in my junk box. Another advantage of having a huge collection of junk which you can work from. Here I have applied some double-sided adhesive tape to that board which will contact the shaft, again to prevent shifting. I have no way, or I would have a way, but I have no comfortable and not over-the-top way of connecting this whole assembly to the shaft except gluing and a lot of tension generated by those rubberized bands. And in the end it held dead. It doesn't shift around an inch. So here I'm testing it out. Here I'm using some zip ties to connect those cables to the battery boxes. Those prevent the cables from shifting out, the whole thing from shifting around. Here's how it looks. And here you can see that I'm using this bottom metal piece, whatever it is. It is basically the end of the spring, which is responsible for the leverage of this lever, which you use when you want to change the length of your stock, which is not going to be happening on this gun. So I can pretty safely just use it as a pivot point for this rubberized band to just secure it in place. And I'm also making those loops, both to make this whole thing look more orderly and manufactured. So it looks like this. Much better than just, you know, a fraying edge like this. And now on the other side, I'm using the anatomy of this M4 shaft, which has a slot here, just like this one, but one here. And I'm using a random metal object to secure this loop in place. So this here is the loop, which I just made here. And here is how it looks in the end. It can't go anywhere. Okay, here you can see a small aluminum profile here, right underneath where those cables leave those battery boxes. Because since I have right here applied a Velcro tape to press those cables more firmly against the gun to avoid cable chaos, they were pressed really, really firmly, thus creating an awkward angle, which was putting a lot of stress onto where they connect to the boxes. So this is why I propped it up by this small piece of aluminum. Looks like this. You can see it in here, supporting those cables. It was a problem just for these two, not for this one. Here's how it looks by now. And you can see, like here, there is something missing. So I've just bought a cheap but nice magazine grip from an airsoft store. You can probably get them in any airsoft store. It is an absolute stock model. It applies to any M4, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. Not gonna go into detail on this, but it was an important design element for this gun. Here you can see that I have printed out on paper and cut out and glued this electric lightning warning sign on top of that box. It was best to use instant glue for this. I tried it with another adhesive, but it was not suited for that. Instant glue did the job very well. There is probably also a better way, probably not cutting them out of paper, but instead out of something else, or doing a really high detail stencil and blah blah blah, but I didn't have time for that, and those held for me just fine. Just if you do it exactly like this with paper and instant glue, you might want to renew them sometimes when they fall off. And here I'm creating a cheek rest from a piece of belt, which ends up in some padding. That's from my belt collection of random belt and belt pieces. Yeah, I will not go into too much detail on this. I'm basically just looping it around those rubberized bands, and then I have sewn it here together. Then I cut this piece off, leaving it like this. So it's just basically loop in loop. And then on top of that, here I've just used some double-sided adhesive tape to connect this piece of pony saddle, which I got from a flea market. So I cut out a piece of that and just, stick it on top of that with some double-sided adhesive tape, because that will not get any stress except my cheek rubbing against it. And even if I lose it, big deal. So yeah, I've done this because it gives a nice detail, finish, and a nice contrast to this black base of this cheek rest. And also it elevates my cheek a bit higher to a comfortable height. Okay, so here's a photo of the rifle so far. Here you can also see that microcontrolling chip with this gray thingy thing going in the rail and stuff. So what I've done here is actually I've photoshopped this decal right here. I wanted a really technical decal that looks like something really industrial. So I've designed this in Photoshop and cut it out with my cutting plotter, which is awesome, as I mentioned. And this is adhesive vinyl foil. It's amazing. And then I sprayed it in two parts. So in the first part, the red part was covered up by duct tape. And then in the second part, I've covered up the blue part by duct tape to spray the red. And here is what the finished stencil looks like. So Prometheus is the rifle name, because that's what we decided for the Resistopia LARP, on which this rifle has seen its first use. And Ares is the in-game company which produces those weapons. And PCR is for everyone basically propulsion coil rifle, and for Resistopia players it's plasma conversion rifle, because on Resistopia this is used as a plasma conversion kit. And A stands for assault, and the last one's just a serial number. A bit of nerd information here.
And as a final touch, I add this blue band to the handle. It is basically more comfortable to grip. It helps me instantly find the exact proper place to grip, blah blah blah. So here is all there is to it. Here's again the starting picture, and I will now show you the finished picture. And the step I'm not showing here is adding some grunge and distress effects, because again I have an entire video about that, so I don't need to go into detail about this. Okay, I hope you guys and girls like this.
Alright, that's it for this episode. If you liked it, then like, comment, subscribe, share it with your friends, but most importantly, check out the first link in the video description. It leads to my Patreon campaign. Patreon is an easy-to-use crowdfunding platform which allows me to produce more content like this for you. I will see you in the next episode.